A poor orphan boy was invited by the wealthy old man. What happens next will leave you speechless. Ethan was a young boy with eyes that carried both innocence and sadness. He had been an orphan for as long as he could remember. His parents had passed away when he was very small, so small that his memories of them were faint like faded pictures in his mind. He remembered the sound of his mother's lullabies and the warmth of his father's hands, but those moments lived only in his heart now. Since then, life had been a test of survival. He had no relatives to turn to, no family to call his own. The only companions he had were the streets, the cold nights, and the quiet corners where he found shelter. Every morning, Ethan woke up to the sound of vendors setting up their stalls and shopkeepers opening their doors. He did not wake up on a soft bed but on an old bench in the park or a narrow alley where he had curled up the night before. His blanket was nothing more than his worn-out jacket, and his pillow was his folded arm. Despite his rough mornings, he would stand up, brush the dust from his clothes, and smile faintly to himself. Life had been unfair, but Ethan had learned one thing: he could not let sadness swallow him. He spent his days doing little jobs around the town. Sometimes he would help an old man carry his groceries, other times he would run small errands for the shopkeepers. A kind bakery owner would let him sweep the floor in exchange for a loaf of bread, and on lucky days, he would get to taste a sweet bun. Most people in the town knew him. Some would smile at him with pity, some would ignore him, and a few would shake their heads as if wondering how a boy so young could endure so much. Yet, what made Ethan different from many others in his situation was his heart. Even when he had so little, he was willing to share. If he found a stray puppy shivering in the cold, he would hold it close to his chest to keep it warm. If he got 2 pieces of bread, he would always give one to someone hungrier than him. People noticed this kindness, though not everyone acted on it. They admired him from afar but did not step forward to change his life. Winter was the hardest season for him. The cold wind bit at his skin, and the nights felt longer and lonelier. He often sat outside the bakery, watching through the window as families gathered around tables, laughing and sharing meals. The golden light spilling from the windows made him feel both comforted and left out. He would imagine himself inside, sitting at a table, being part of a family that cared for him. Sometimes he closed his eyes and pretended he could hear his mother's voice calling him to dinner. Those were dreams that kept him alive, even though he knew they were only dreams. Despite his struggles, Ethan never gave up on hope. He often whispered small prayers into the night sky, asking for a chance, just a chance, to live a life where he was not invisible. He wanted to go to school like the other children he saw walking with books in their hands. He wanted to learn, to read stories, to write his own one day. But school required money, and money was something Ethan never had. Still, he carried a little notebook he had found in the trash. With a stub of pencil, he scribbled words he picked up from signboards and shopkeepers. His notebook was his treasure, and he guarded it as if it were gold. The townspeople sometimes whispered about him. Some said he would grow up to be a fine man because of his good heart. Others feared he would be swallowed by the harshness of life. But Ethan did not listen to those voices. Deep inside, he told himself that something good was waiting for him. He didn't know when or how, but he believed that life would not always be so cruel. One chilly evening, as the sun was setting and painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Ethan sat on the curb outside the bakery again. He pressed his knees to his chest and watched people buy warm loaves of bread. Families hurried past him, holding hands, their laughter filling the air. Ethan's stomach growled, but he smiled anyway, trying to feel joy just by seeing others happy. His hands were cold, and his jacket was too thin for the season, but he kept sitting there quietly. The bakery owner, noticing him, walked outside and handed him a small piece of bread. "Here you go, Ethan," the man said kindly. Ethan's face lit up as if he had been given a grand gift. "Thank you, sir," he replied softly, his voice full of gratitude. He tore the bread in half, and when he saw a stray dog wandering nearby, he placed one piece on the ground for the animal. The baker shook his head with a sad smile. "You have a heart bigger than this town, boy," he murmured before returning inside. Ethan finished his piece slowly, savoring every bite as if it were a feast. Then he leaned back against the wall, staring at the mansion on the hill in the distance. It was the largest house in town, belonging to Mr. Donovan, the wealthy old man who was rarely seen outside. People said he was strict, cold, and lived alone after losing his son. To Ethan, the mansion looked like a castle from a storybook, a place he could never imagine stepping into. He wondered how it would feel to walk through such grand doors or to sit at a table where food never ran out. But he quickly shook off the thought. Daydreams did not fill stomachs. As night fell, Ethan pulled his jacket tighter and prepared to find a corner where he could sleep. The stars began to appear, twinkling faintly, and the town grew quiet. He lay down on a bench under a tree, looking up at the sky. "Maybe tomorrow will be better," he whispered to himself. His eyelids grew heavy, but his mind wandered to his parents, the life he lost, and the life he wished for. In his heart, he carried a fragile hope, unaware that destiny was already moving in his favor. Somewhere beyond his imagination, someone had noticed him, and soon his life would take a turn he could never have dreamed of. That night, as the cold wind wrapped around him, Ethan did not know that this was the last evening he would spend in loneliness. Something extraordinary was waiting just around the corner, and his story was about to change forever. The next day began like any other for Ethan. The winter morning was quiet, with frost covering the rooftops and a pale sun struggling to warm the town. Ethan rubbed his hands together to fight the cold as he wandered through the streets, looking for small jobs to earn a little food. Though the air was sharp and biting, his spirit was not broken. He hummed softly to himself, a tune his mother once sang, to keep away the silence of loneliness. By afternoon, he found himself back near the bakery, as he often did. The smell of freshly baked bread and cakes filled the air, making his stomach growl with hunger. He sat on the same curb as the night before, hugging his knees and watching people pass by. Children laughed as they clutched bags of sweets, and parents smiled as they held hands with their little ones. Ethan's heart ached, but he still managed a small smile. It gave him comfort to see joy, even if he couldn't have it himself. Just as he was lost in thought, a black car stopped in front of the bakery. The townspeople turned their heads in surprise. It wasn't common to see such a grand car in that part of town, and even less common to see who stepped out of it. Slowly, with the help of a cane, an elderly man in a long coat emerged. It was Mr. Donovan, the wealthy old man whose mansion on the hill towered over the town. Everyone whispered and stared, for Mr. Donovan rarely left his home, and when he did, he was usually accompanied by assistants. But today, he walked alone, his face calm yet unreadable. Ethan watched curiously, unsure why a man of such wealth would stop in front of a simple bakery. As Mr. Donovan looked around, his sharp eyes landed on the small boy sitting on the curb. Ethan immediately lowered his gaze, embarrassed by his ragged clothes and dusty shoes. But instead of walking past, Mr. Donovan walked directly toward him. The sound of the cane tapping against the cobblestone grew louder with each step until it stopped right in front of Ethan. "You're Ethan, aren't you?" the old man asked, his voice deep and steady. Ethan's eyes widened. How could this man know his name? He nodded slowly, unsure if he should speak. "I've seen you before," Mr. Donovan continued. "Sitting here, helping people, giving away even when you have nothing. Tell me, boy, why do you do that?" Ethan hesitated. No one had ever asked him such a question before. He looked up shyly and said, "Because, if I can make someone smile, even a little, then I feel like I'm not so alone." For the first time in years, a faint smile appeared on Mr. Donovan's face. The crowd nearby whispered in shock. Was the old man really talking to the poor orphan boy? Without another word, Mr. Donovan extended his hand. "Come with me, Ethan. I'd like you to join me for dinner tonight." Ethan blinked, thinking he had misheard. Dinner? At the mansion? His heart raced, and his mouth went dry. Surely, this had to be a dream. Why would someone like Mr. Donovan invite him, a poor orphan, into his grand home? He stammered, "Yes, sir, I don't belong there." "I'm just—" Mr. Donovan interrupted gently. "Nonsense. You belong wherever kindness is welcome, and my home has been missing that for too long. Now, will you come?" The bakery owner, who had been watching from the doorway, stepped closer. "Go on, Ethan," he encouraged softly. "This might be the chance you've been waiting for." With trembling hands, Ethan stood up. He felt the eyes of the townspeople following him as he walked beside the wealthy old man toward the car. Whispers floated in the air, some curious, some doubtful, some even envious. But Ethan barely heard them. His mind was racing with questions. What would he see inside that mansion? Would he be treated kindly, or was this all some test? He climbed into the car with nervous excitement, his heart pounding like a drum. The ride to the mansion felt surreal. Ethan pressed his face lightly against the window, watching the houses grow smaller and the road wind upward toward the hill. The closer they got, the larger and grander the mansion appeared. Its tall gates opened slowly, and Ethan's eyes widened at the sight of the gardens filled with trimmed hedges, statues, and fountains that sparkled in the fading sunlight. He had never seen anything like it before. When the car stopped, a servant opened the door, clearly surprised to see a boy step out alongside Mr. Donovan. Ethan felt small and out of place, but Mr. Donovan gave him a reassuring nod. "Come, Ethan. Don't be afraid." As they entered the mansion, Ethan's breath caught in his throat. The chandeliers glowed above them like stars, and the marble floors shone so brightly he could see his reflection. Paintings lined the walls, and grand staircases curled upward on either side. It was like stepping into a dream, one too beautiful to be real. Ethan rubbed his eyes, half expecting everything to vanish. Mr. Donovan led him to a large dining hall. The table stretched longer than any he had ever seen, decorated with silverware and golden plates. Servants carried in trays filled with dishes that smelled heavenly: roast chicken, warm soup, fresh bread, and fruits of every kind. Ethan froze at the sight, unsure whether he should even sit. "Come," Mr. Donovan said, pulling out a chair for him. "This evening, you are my guest." Ethan sat carefully, his hands resting awkwardly in his lap. He was terrified of making a mistake, but when the food was placed before him, his hunger overcame his fear. He took a small bite of bread, and his eyes filled with tears. It was soft, warm, and unlike anything he had tasted before. He ate slowly, savoring each bite, while Mr. Donovan watched him with thoughtful eyes. For a while, there was silence, broken only by the clinking of silverware. Then Mr. Donovan asked, "Tell me about your life, Ethan." Ethan lowered his fork and took a deep breath. No one had ever truly asked him before. He spoke quietly but honestly about how he lost his parents, how he survived by working odd jobs, how he often went hungry, and how he still dreamed of going to school. He spoke about his little notebook, how he scribbled down words to teach himself, and how he hoped one day to write stories of his own. Mr. Donovan listened intently, never interrupting. His eyes softened as Ethan spoke, and at times, he nodded as if he understood the pain hidden behind the boy's words. The more Ethan shared, the lighter his heart felt, as if a heavy burden was slowly being lifted. When Ethan finished, the old man leaned back in his chair and said quietly, "You have suffered greatly, yet you still choose kindness. That is rare, Ethan. Very rare." Ethan lowered his eyes, embarrassed. I just don't want to be like the world that hurt me. I want to be better." Mr. Donovan's face grew thoughtful. He tapped his cane gently against the floor and then said, "You remind me of someone I once knew. Someone I loved very dearly." Ethan tilted his head, curious, but the old man said no more. Instead, he gestured for Ethan to eat as much as he wanted. Ethan's hunger finally broke through his shyness, and he ate until he was full, something he had not felt in years. As the evening came to an end, Ethan thought it was time to leave, but Mr. Donovan stopped him. "No, Ethan. You will stay here tonight. My home has many rooms, and one of them can be yours." Ethan's eyes widened in disbelief. "Am mine?" "Yes," Mr. Donovan said firmly. "You will not sleep on cold benches or streets tonight. From this moment, you are under my roof." Ethan's heart pounded with gratitude and shock. He followed a servant up to a room that was bigger than anything he had ever imagined. A soft bed, warm blankets, and a window overlooking the town awaited him. As he sat on the bed, tears slipped down his cheeks. For the first time in his life, he felt safe. For the first time, he dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, his prayers had been heard. And as he drifted to sleep in that soft bed, he had no idea that this invitation to dinner was only the beginning of a journey that would change his life forever. The morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the room, falling gently on Ethan's face. He stirred slowly, blinking his eyes open, unsure for a moment if he was dreaming. The softness of the bed, the warmth of the blanket, and the sweet smell of flowers from the garden outside all felt too perfect to be real. He sat up, rubbing his eyes, and looked around the room once again. The polished wooden furniture, the curtains that shimmered in the light, and the small shelf with books waiting to be opened were all things he had never imagined would surround him. For the first time in his life, he had not been woken by the cold wind or the noise of the street, but by comfort and peace. Ethan stood carefully, still afraid that he might ruin something by touching it. He tiptoed toward the window and looked out at the wide garden below. The fountains sparkled in the morning sun, and gardeners moved about, trimming hedges and watering the flowers. He whispered to himself, "It's like another world." His heart was filled with gratitude, but also nervousness. He wondered what Mr. Donovan would expect from him now. Why had the wealthy old man been so kind? What could a poor orphan boy like him ever give in return? Soon, a servant knocked gently on the door and told Ethan that breakfast was ready. Ethan quickly washed his face, combed his messy hair with his fingers, and followed the servant down the long hallways. The mansion seemed even larger in the daylight. Every step echoed, and he felt as if the walls were filled with secrets he had yet to discover. Finally, he entered the dining hall again, where Mr. Donovan sat at the head of the table. "Good morning, Ethan," the old man said warmly. "Did you sleep well?" "Yes, sir," Ethan replied shyly. "Better than I've ever slept before." Mr. Donovan smiled faintly and gestured for him to sit. Breakfast was laid out with fresh bread, fruit, eggs, and warm milk. Ethan hesitated, feeling unworthy of such a feast, but Mr. Donovan encouraged him. "Eat, my boy. You don't have to be afraid here." As Ethan ate, Mr. Donovan began asking him more questions. He wanted to know about Ethan's favorite memories, his dreams, and what made him happiest. Ethan spoke softly at first, but as the old man listened with genuine interest, he grew more comfortable. He told him about the little notebook he carried, about how he wrote words he found on signboards and dreamed of writing his own stories one day. Mr. Donovan's eyes softened as he listened, nodding gently. "You have a mind eager to learn," he said thoughtfully. "And a heart that refuses to give in to bitterness. That is a rare gift." Ethan blushed at the praise. "I don't know if it's a gift," he murmured. I just want to be someone who makes the world kinder, not harsher." Those words touched Mr. Donovan deeply. For years, he had lived in loneliness, his heart hardened by grief. He had lost his only son in an accident long ago, and since then, his mansion had been filled with silence. But now, listening to Ethan, he felt something stirring inside him again, something he had thought was gone forever. After breakfast, Mr. Donovan surprised Ethan by giving him a tour of the mansion. Room by room, Ethan's eyes widened in amazement. There was a library filled with rows of books, their spines gleaming in the light. Ethan stopped in awe, running his fingers gently over the covers, whispering the titles to himself. "So many stories," he said with wonder. Mr. Donovan noticed the sparkle in his eyes and smiled. "You may read as many as you like. This library is yours too now." They walked through the music room, where a grand piano stood waiting. They passed through halls with tall windows that opened to the gardens. Everywhere Ethan looked, he found beauty, but he never forgot his own past. Instead of feeling greedy, he only felt thankful, and quietly promised himself that if he was allowed to stay, he would never take any of this for granted. That evening, dinner was once again served at the long table. This time, Ethan was less shy, though he still tried his best to use the fork and spoon carefully, copying the way Mr. Donovan ate. The old man noticed and chuckled softly, not in mockery but in affection. "You don't have to be perfect, Ethan," he said gently. "Just be yourself." The warmth in his words eased Ethan's nerves, and for the first time, he laughed at the table. It was a small laugh, but it filled the hall with something it had not heard in years, childlike joy. After the meal, Mr. Donovan leaned on his cane and looked at Ethan with serious eyes. "You know, Ethan, I did not bring you here by chance. There was a reason I invited you." Ethan tilted his head, unsure. "Why, sir?" Mr. Donovan took a deep breath, as if gathering the courage to speak. "You see, I once had a son. He was around your age when I lost him. My home has been empty ever since. When I saw you sitting outside that bakery, giving away half your bread to a hungry dog, something inside me stirred. You reminded me of him, the same kindness in your eyes, the same strength in your heart. I knew I had to speak to you." Ethan's chest tightened with emotion. He didn't know what to say. I I didn't know, sir," he whispered softly. Mr. Donovan nodded. "Of course you didn't. But now you understand why I asked you here. My wealth means nothing without someone to share it with. My house, my gardens, my meals, they have all been empty without laughter or love. And now, I see in you the chance to bring back what I lost. You don't have to answer me now, Ethan, but I would like you to stay here. Not just as a guest, but as family." Ethan gasped, his eyes wide with disbelief. Family. That word had always been a distant dream, something he longed for but never imagined he would hear directed at him. Tears welled up in his eyes, but he quickly wiped them away, afraid to look weak. His voice trembled as he said, "You mean, you would really want me here?" "With all my heart," Mr. Donovan replied. The servants standing nearby exchanged surprised glances, but no one dared interrupt. The old man's tone was firm, filled with sincerity. Ethan felt a warmth spreading through his chest, a feeling he had never known before. Belonging. Love. Hope. That night, when Ethan returned to the soft bed in his room, he lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling. His thoughts were racing. Was this real? Could he truly have found a home after all these years of loneliness? He clutched his little notebook to his chest, whispering, "Maybe my prayers were heard after all." As sleep finally overtook him, a gentle smile remained on his face. Deep inside, he knew his life was no longer the same. Something extraordinary had begun, and though he could not yet see the full path ahead, he believed it would lead him to the family he had always dreamed of. Ethan woke up the next morning with a sense of wonder still glowing in his chest. The night before felt like a dream, yet the soft bed beneath him, the warmth of the blankets, and the golden morning light pouring into his room reminded him that everything was real. He sat up slowly, his eyes wandering around the elegant room, still unsure how he, a poor orphan boy, had ended up here. His heart raced as he remembered Mr. Donovan's words at dinner, words that had been echoing in his mind over and over, "I would like you to stay here. Not just as a guest, but as family." The thought alone was enough to bring tears to Ethan's eyes. Family. It was a word he had whispered to himself on countless lonely nights, a word that carried both pain and hope. And now, someone was offering it to him, not just anyone, but the wealthiest man in town, a man who could have chosen anyone to care for but had chosen him. Ethan hugged his little notebook tightly to his chest, whispering a silent prayer of thanks before rising to start the day. At breakfast, Mr. Donovan greeted him with a warm smile. "Good morning, Ethan. Did you rest well?" "Yes, sir," Ethan answered softly, though his eyes sparkled. "Better than ever." As they ate, the old man spoke more openly than before. He shared stories about his son, telling Ethan how much he had loved books, music, and laughter. Ethan listened carefully, noticing the sadness in Mr. Donovan's voice each time he mentioned his son's name. It was clear that the wound of loss was still deep, even after so many years. Ethan wanted to say something comforting, but he also feared he might say the wrong thing. Instead, he let his sincerity shine through. "He must have been very kind," Ethan said gently. "I think he would be proud that you remember him with so much love." Mr. Donovan's eyes grew misty, and he nodded. "He was kind. And yes, I hope he would be proud. I've lived in silence for too long, Ethan. I thought nothing could fill the emptiness in this house again. But when I look at you, I see something I thought I had lost forever." Ethan felt his throat tighten. He wanted to thank the old man, but words felt too small for the gratitude swelling in his heart. All he could do was bow his head and whisper, "I'll never let you down, sir." That day, Mr. Donovan asked Ethan to walk with him in the gardens. The air was crisp, and the scent of roses filled the air as they strolled along the stone paths. The fountains sparkled in the sun, and birds fluttered about, chirping cheerfully. Ethan walked a little behind at first, still shy, but Mr. Donovan encouraged him to walk beside him. "You do not need to trail behind me, Ethan. If you are to be my family, you must walk by my side." Those words made Ethan's heart leap. Slowly, he moved closer, matching the old man's steps. As they walked, Mr. Donovan told him more about his life, how he had built his wealth, how he had once been full of ambition, and how losing his son had left him without purpose. Ethan listened carefully, feeling a mixture of sorrow and admiration. This man had everything money could buy, yet his greatest treasure had been something money could never replace. After a while, they sat on a bench near a fountain. Mr. Donovan leaned on his cane, his face thoughtful. "Ethan, do you know why I chose you?" Ethan shook his head slowly. "No, sir. I've wondered, but I don't know." Mr. Donovan turned to look at him with kind eyes. "Because when I saw you, I saw more than a poor orphan boy. I saw strength in your eyes. I saw kindness in the way you shared your bread with a stray dog. I saw hope in the way you smiled, even when life had given you nothing. Most people would grow bitter in your place, but you chose to remain gentle. That is what touched my heart." Ethan's eyes filled with tears. He had never thought of himself as strong. He had simply done what felt right. To hear someone acknowledge it, especially someone like Mr. Donovan, made his chest swell with both humility and pride. I I didn't know anyone noticed," Ethan whispered. "I noticed," Mr. Donovan said firmly. "And I want you to know something. You don't need to keep wandering the streets anymore. You don't need to wonder where your next meal will come from. You belong here now. If you will allow it, Ethan, I would like to adopt you as my son." The words hit Ethan like a lightning bolt. He stared at Mr. Donovan, unable to speak. His heart raced, his throat closed, and his mind filled with disbelief. Adopt him? Be his son? For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Tears spilled freely down Ethan's cheeks. You want me to be your son?" he asked in a trembling voice. "With all my heart," Mr. Donovan said, his voice steady and full of love. "I lost my child once, but perhaps fate has given me another chance. You are not replacing him, Ethan. No one ever could. But you can bring new light into my life, and I can give you the family you have longed for. Together, perhaps we can heal." Ethan covered his face with his hands, sobbing quietly. He had dreamed of this moment all his life, yet never thought it would come true. "I don't know what to say," he whispered between tears. "Say yes," Mr. Donovan said gently. Ethan looked up, his face wet but glowing with emotion. "Yes, sir. Yes. I want to stay. I want to be your son." Mr. Donovan reached out and placed a trembling hand on Ethan's shoulder. It was the touch of love, of acceptance, of a bond being formed. For the first time in years, the old man's eyes filled not with sorrow but with joy. When they returned to the mansion, the servants were stunned to hear the news. Some whispered in disbelief, while others smiled quietly, touched by the old man's decision. Ethan, though overwhelmed, felt only gratitude. He knew there would be people who questioned it, people who might not understand, but none of that mattered. What mattered was that he finally had a place to belong. That evening, when Ethan went to his room, he sat at the desk and opened his little notebook. With careful hands, he wrote a single sentence: "Today, I found a father, and today, I was found." He closed the notebook and pressed it against his heart, tears falling again, but this time tears of joy. For the first time in his life, he was not just Ethan the orphan. He was Ethan, the son of someone who cared, someone who believed in him, someone who called him family. That night, as he drifted to sleep, he whispered softly to himself, "I'm not alone anymore." And the house that had been silent for so long seemed to breathe again, as if welcoming the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with love, healing, and hope. Ethan's life changed in ways he could never have imagined. Each day that passed inside the mansion brought him something new, new experiences, new lessons, and above all, a sense of belonging he had long prayed for. No longer did he wake up on cold benches or wonder if he would eat that day. Now, he rose each morning to the soft glow of sunlight filling his room, the sound of birds singing outside, and the knowledge that he was not alone. For a boy who had once been invisible to the world, every moment now felt like a gift. Mr. Donovan kept his word. He did not treat Ethan as a guest who might one day leave but as a son who was meant to stay. He introduced him to the townspeople not as the orphan boy but proudly as "My boy, Ethan." At first, people were shocked. They whispered behind their hands, wondering why the wealthiest man in town had chosen an orphan to be his heir. Some doubted Ethan, saying he was too poor, too uneducated, too ordinary to belong in a mansion. But Ethan, remembering all the hardships he had endured, did not let their whispers crush him. Instead, he carried himself with humility and kindness, showing through his actions that he was worthy of the love and trust Mr. Donovan had placed in him. With Mr. Donovan's guidance, Ethan finally began attending school. He was nervous at first, sitting among children who had been learning for years while he had only scribbled words in his small notebook. But he studied harder than anyone, fueled by the opportunity he had once only dreamed of. Teachers noticed his determination, and soon, classmates who had doubted him began to admire his efforts. Ethan's joy was not just in learning for himself but in the fact that he could share his progress with Mr. Donovan each evening. He would come home excited to read a passage aloud or solve a problem, and the old man would listen with pride shining in his eyes. The mansion itself also began to feel different. For years, it had been a quiet, lonely place where servants moved silently, and rooms stood unused. But now, it was filled with laughter. Ethan's footsteps echoed through the halls, his laughter carried into the garden, and his presence warmed even the servants' hearts. They began to see him not as an outsider but as a boy who brought life back into their master's world. Ethan made a point to treat everyone with respect, from the gardeners to the cooks, remembering what it felt like to be looked down upon. Slowly, he won everyone over with his genuine kindness. One of Ethan's favorite places in the mansion was the library. Surrounded by shelves upon shelves of books, he often spent hours reading, losing himself in stories of adventure, courage, and hope. Mr. Donovan would sometimes sit with him, watching quietly as Ethan's eyes sparkled with wonder. It reminded the old man of his son, and though the memory still carried pain, it no longer felt like a wound. Instead, it felt like healing, as if through Ethan, his son's spirit lived on in a new way. But Ethan never forgot where he came from. Even as he adjusted to his new life, he remembered the cold nights, the empty stomach, and the loneliness of the streets. Instead of pushing those memories away, he carried them as reminders of who he was and what he wanted to become. He told Mr. Donovan that one day, when he was older, he wanted to help other children like him, orphans who had no home, no family, and no hope. Mr. Donovan, touched by his words, promised to support that dream. "Together, we can build something greater than ourselves," he told Ethan. "You have the heart for it, and I will make sure you have the means." Seasons passed, and their bond grew stronger with each day. Ethan no longer called Mr. Donovan sir. With time, he began calling him father, the word rolling off his tongue softly at first but with more confidence as days turned into months. Each time he said it, Mr. Donovan's eyes lit up, and the heaviness he had carried for years seemed to lift a little more. For Ethan, it was a word that carried all the love he had missed in his childhood, and for Mr. Donovan, it was a word that gave him new life in his old age. The townspeople, once doubtful, slowly came to accept what they saw with their own eyes. They saw a boy who remained humble despite his new life, a boy who helped others whenever he could. They saw an old man who had once been distant and lonely now walking through the town with a gentle smile, his cane tapping against the cobblestone, his new son beside him. Together, they were proof that family was not just about blood but about love, choice, and the courage to open one's heart. Years later, when Ethan grew into a young man, he carried forward the promise he had made to himself as a child. With Mr. Donovan's help, he opened a small home for orphans in the town, a place where no child would have to sleep hungry or cold. He filled it with books, warm meals, and teachers who cared. He often visited the children, telling them his own story, how he had once been just like them and how hope had changed his life. The children listened with wide eyes, finding comfort in his words, and many began to dream again because of him. Mr. Donovan, though older now, lived to see this dream take shape. He would often sit in the garden, watching Ethan play with the children, his heart swelling with pride. "You've given me more than I ever gave you," he once told Ethan. "You've given me back my purpose." And Ethan, smiling warmly, would always reply, "You gave me a home, Father. Everything I do is because of you." As the years went on, their story became one the townspeople often told. It was a story of kindness, of second chances, and of how a poor orphan boy and a lonely wealthy man found in each other the family they had both been searching for. People who once judged Ethan now used his story to teach their own children about compassion, humility, and the power of love. Ethan never let his wealth or position change the core of who he was. He remained the boy with a giving heart, always remembering the days when he had nothing and choosing to use his blessings to lift others. And though Mr. Donovan's steps grew slower with time, his heart was lighter than it had ever been. His final years were not spent in silence but in the laughter of a son who had brought life back into his world. Ethan often looked back on the night it all began, the cold evening outside the bakery when a wealthy old man had stopped his car and spoken to him. A simple invitation to dinner had become the doorway to a new life, a family, and a purpose greater than anything he had dared to imagine. It reminded him that even the smallest moments could hold the power to change everything. And so, the boy who once had nothing grew into a man who gave everything. His story became proof that miracles are not always grand or magical, they sometimes come quietly, through kindness, love, and the courage of two lonely hearts willing to take a chance on each other.